Hey everybody, Missing Score 44 here, and this will be my very first Marvel's Avengers event review for the highly anticipated Red Room Takeover event. The format for my review is a little bit different from most, as I will break it down into four categories and give a score to each of my expectations versus what was actually delivered. So, for example, if my expectation on the story is a 10 and I was given a 4, then my expectations were not met. At the end of the four sections, the points will be added up. So, if my expectations have a total score of, let's say, a 50 and I was given a 42, then my expectations were relatively met. Or if it's far below, well, you get the picture. It will make more sense as we go along. So, first up is the story. And so, the story of the Red Room Takeover is basically Yelena Belova has hacked some aimbots and has somehow managed to hack into the Avengers helicarrier's harm room. And if she's not stopped, then, well, she can gain control of the Chimera, and that will be disaster for the Avengers. You really need to look into like the codex to get a little background and into like the mission chains to see things that Yelena is saying to Natasha. So my expectations. I expected a continuation or consequence for Black Widow's action in the main story, which means, basically a follow-up of her time in AIM where she used Yelena's name as her cover name. I think it was Dr. Yelena Belova when she was in AIM at the time. And for this section, I gave it a 5 as far as my expectations. I really want them to continue that thread and maybe with some cinematics and stuff like that. And so my second expectation was some sort of high stakes that involved the other Avengers or a lead into the Kree plot line. And so, as far as we know from Future Imperfect, there is going to be a Kree invasion and the helicarrier, I guess, crashed at some point. And I'm expecting there to be some tie-in with Yelena's involvement. Maybe she successfully hacked the helicarrier while the invasion was going down, and it left the Avengers very vulnerable. My third expectation is the appearance of Yelena Belova as a potential Black Widow boss battle. And now, like the prior section, I gave it a 5. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. So these sections are all 5 so far. I expect there to be a payoff at the end with Yelena and Widow facing off, and we'll see how that goes. And my last expectation for the story is a cinematic performance from the cast. Maybe some inner communication with Natasha and her teammates, explaining the history of Yelena to get her in universe, and that too has a 5. So in summary, my expectations are a continuation of Black Widow's actions from the main story, which is a 5. Some sort of high stakes that involve the other Avengers or a potential lead into the Kree plot line, which is a 5-pointer. The appearance of Yelena Belova as potential Black Widow boss battle, another 5. And a cinematic performance from the cast, which is also a 5. So that brings my expectations to a grand total of 20 points. Now let's see how the game actually did. And so this is what we got. Number 1. Yelena is upset, so it does tie in. She's upset at what Black Widow did. So I gave that a 5-pointer. 5 points. That does tie into my expectations. Number 2. You find out if you read the content that she can potentially take over the Chimera. And there's no cinematic for that. There's no interaction. There's no talking to Tony Stark. There's no talking to Maria Hill. There's nothing but text. There's not even a James Woo interaction when you go down to the harm room. But if you read the text, you have to actually go look for it. So when you fire up the missions, there's some text there as well. So I will be docking points for the lack of performances. So that got a 3-pointer for me out of 5 potential points. And that is what they delivered. So compared to my 20 expectation, I got a 7 in the story department. And now for the second quarter, which is the presentation. My expectations were, number 1, to have a dark and brooding Red Room aesthetic. Something that really just pops and stands out, and it looks gloomy and dangerous. And I gave that a 5 as far as expectation. My second point is I wanted reskinned enemies that really make them pop against the atmosphere. Maybe some neon type of red or darker blacks, or maybe something that really makes them stand out against the red background, so they're not hard to see. And this is what we got. So, well, before I go on, I just want to say that my expectations were a total of 10 points, and this is what we got from the Avengers. Number one, we got a dark and brooding aesthetic, which is, pretty much expected from the images and what they shared on Twitter and the trailer and stuff. And I gave that a 5. That was, it met my expectations as far as what we'll see visually. But point number 2 is that some of the enemies were hard to see, and they were at times difficult to differentiate, such as I think it was the Red Room number 2, where the shielding drone appears over the the big mech thing. I keep forgetting the name of it. And it's shielding it, and you can hardly tell that's what it's doing. It appears at first to be a regular drone, but upon a closer examination, you see you have to take that out first, and then you can move on to the mech. And some enemies, there were a lot of different types. Some were hard to tell apart because some of them had certain color coding. And it was very difficult to tell who was who. So I did dock points for that, and I gave that a 3 out of 5 potential points. Okay, and now the third quarter of the game. My expectations, the challenge of the Red Room content and the environmental hazards, I expected that to be, a 5. They were hyping up how difficult it was, and as we're gearing up for Omega level threats, I figured this would be a bit of a preview of the puzzles we can expect. So I gave this a 5 in expectations. Point number 2, ease of gameplay and with any character that you are knowledgeable of. So what I mean by ease of gameplay is that this content isn't, only difficult for flying types or only difficult for characters that have to stay on the ground. You can relatively dive in with any character that you expect, that you main with, So this is what I was expecting as far as the content goes, and I gave that a 5 as well. Point number 3, the animation. I wanted it to protect you from getting a ring out, because there are some times where I'm doing like, a hive or something, or just regular content, and I would do a takedown and I fall off the side or something or whatever, being too close to the edge. I expected that to be patched up, consider this is a one-hit kill if you get a ring out. So I gave that a 5 in expectation. And point number 4, I really wanted a single character boss battle. And this is what we got. So point number 1, the content was challenging a little bit, and the hazards were nice, but it wasn't overly challenging. And most of the times that I lost, it was because I was goofing off, jumping over the edge, hooking people with Widow's zip line and not being able to recover in time to get back to the platform. A lot of the times that I lost was because of that. Other times was because I, carelessly handled the enemies that were getting thrown my way. So it wasn't like impossible to do, but at the same time, it didn't feel like anything different than I would do in the custom harm room. So I did dock points for that, and I gave that a 3. Point number 2, it was very easy to jump in with any character. I mainly played it as Black Widow, I guess, for the full experience. Plus I was getting to learn Black Widow. The first time I played through, she was power level 67, I believe, and I actually went on to train her up and did some more missions outside of Red Room and got her up to 120, and then I dove back in and finished the rest of the content. It was easy to do with her, and I did a couple with Iron Man, a couple with Hulk, so it wasn't difficult to jump in with any character, so I gave that a 5. And now the fourth quarter. My expectation, point number 1, I wanted a reason to be collecting tokens. So in the Ruskaya protocols, we were collecting tokens, and it really didn't seem to be a reason to do that, other than just putting a number on the board. So I gave that a 5 in my expectations. I really wanted that to pay off and do something. And point number 2, I wanted unlockable gear at the vendors. I gave that a 2-pointer. Unlockable nameplates at the vendors, which is point number 3. I gave that a 2-pointer. Point number 4, I wanted unlockable skins that were once patterns. I gave that a 2-pointer. So a little background on that. We used to have a system in the game where you can gain these chips called patterns. You take them down to a special room with a helicarrier, and it unlocks a random skin. We haven't been able to use those for a while, so I was hoping they would bring that back for this, and we can exchange tokens for those skins that we can't purchase at the current time. So that's a 2-pointer. And my last point, which is point number 5, I wanted gear for all of my characters. And, typically you get like legendary or exotics if you complete all the chains in a special events chain line. That was my last point, which is a 5-pointer. And this is what we got. So the first thing, point number 1, we got padded out content and repetition. There really wasn't any reason to collect any tokens or really do any of the content. Really, there was no point to use the vendors. You just kind of go in and you play the red room harm rooms, and you play them 2-3 times for mission chains. So I gave that a 0. And point number 2, I wanted gear after doing all the quest chains, which I did get a gear piece per character, I believe, after I completed everything in the quest chain. But it was tedious. It wasn't exactly all that fun. And I gave that a 2 out of whatever my expectation was. So I gave that a 2 for overall. And that brings us to our final score. So team me, my expectation totaled out to a 63. So the game has to meet 63 to totally meet my expectations. And what the Avengers actually got, they got a score of a 26. So this event, was it a success? Was it a failure? In my opinion, there were some things they did well, a lot of things they didn't really do well. It just felt like rehashed content to me. But let me know how you felt about it. Comment down below, like, subscribe, and let me know what you really thought about the event and what they could do better, and what they could potentially do to improve events going forward. Once again, this has been Mr. Score 44, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.